Italy? Whiskey? Ah, Italy, you could never look at my secret. Oh no, suddenly. Hello, Libby! Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat. And I am here with returning guest Johnathan Taylor. It's been like since 2019. Actually, when the last time I saw you, you were at the ICMI, 2019. So welcome back. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, man, it feels like a blast from the past. It's just nice to reconnect with you guys and see how everyone's been doing and what you guys are up to, and just a lot has changed in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, what's funny is that like I actually was legitimately looking at calling up a bunch of the people that we used to have on and bring them back on to like, you know, do follow-ups. Like we just did a meetup recently, which we haven't done in years, since 2019 actually. And, you know, I've been emailing out to guys from NCFM and stuff like that. So then I was like, oh, I should reach out to Johnathan Taylor. And then it was like that week you put out a video on your channel, which is like a, you know, like a new project you're doing. And I thought, oh, I'd love to get him on to talk about that. So it's just weird, man. Yeah.
It's amazing how, you know, it's a big world and yet it's kind of a small world at the same time, you know, in that just stuff tends to click, you know, at once.
Serendipity. Yeah, for sure. Or is that the word for it, or is it synchronicity? I don't know, but
I don't know. It feels like the right word. So
yeah, it feels like the right word. Exactly. So before, you used to run a channel and a website that was, I remember when it was called Justice for Men and Boys in Education, I think. Wasn't that what it was called?
Oh, you are close.
I'm really close. What was it?
Yeah, I apologize to the viewers for me changing the name of the organization several times. So way back in days of yore, 2013, I ran a YouTube channel that eventually became a website back in 2013. It was called A Voice for Male Students.
Oh yeah, that's right. A Voice for Male Students. That's
and then like in 2015, I temporarily changed it to Boys and Men in Education. And then I'm like, this is not working. We're going to change to a different format. And so now it's called Title IX for All. And a lot of stuff went into that change. I apologize to everyone who's been following my work or trying to for the confusion. But yeah, now it's called Title IX for All. And it's a very different format, which we can get into if at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I got a couple things mixed up. But yes, that's right. It was Title IX for All. I know that because I remember when you were at the ICMI 2019. Yeah. You know, you spoke there, and that was like what the organization was called at that time. And you put out a new video, a very short one, and you were going to be going in another direction. And I believe that the channel is called The Common Man, right?
Yeah. And, that was just the last week and a half or something. Yeah.
Yeah, the last week and a half. Hopefully this is what it is for a while. You're not going to change it again on us, right?
Yeah, no anticipation of doing that. But yeah, there is this one, I hope, has a little bit more of a deliberate strategy. I've been wanting to get back into YouTube for a long time, for years, actually, because there's just so much value in reaching out to people on YouTube, because that's, for a lot of people who are under 30, like that's the new Google. You know, they're not necessarily looking for a quick answer or even an AI answer. They're looking for a conversation, and they're looking for someone they can know, like, and trust. You know, especially since I think, you know, we live in the golden age of scams, especially with AI now, that I think authenticity is increasingly becoming one of the most valued currencies in social matters. And I think that YouTube really helps deliver on that authenticity. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm planning on increasing, going back into YouTube.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's funny you mentioned authenticity. I remember having a lunch with Paul Elam, and he said exactly that. He said that, you know what, people want right now more than anything is authenticity, because of how sort of, digital everything is, and how disconnected everybody is, and all
they
of
feel
that.
like, for good reason, that they cannot trust their institutions and many other things similar to that.
Yeah, for sure. So what's changed? What have you been doing in the last 5 years?
Or, it's kind of like what hasn't changed, more
years.
like it.
Right.
I'm sorry, how far back do you want me to go? Do you want me to kinda...
20, I guess, like the last time I saw you was in 2019.
Yeah.
So that was when we did the ICMI. That was like August. So I don't know, like what, I know that, we got hit. There are some experiences that we all share.
Right.
Right.
We all got smacked with COVID, or COVID, the consequences of COVID at some point.
Yeah. How did that affect you?
I miraculously did not get COVID. To my knowledge, there are some people who tested and found that they had the antibodies for it, but they never felt the symptoms. I did get a vaccine and a follow-up vaccine. And I did not get it. Some people who were close to me did get it. So I feel lucky or blessed. But then again, I'm not in the highest risk, or even a high risk demographic. It's really the 65 age plus people who are really in the high risk for it, should they contract it. So, and I've always been at least moderately active, which helps keep me somewhat healthy, and I guess resistant to some of it. But I've been rather blessed in that regard. For me, the consequences have been more to society, that a lot of things have been shut down. The economy was essentially put on life support, and then kind of, they tried to resuscitate it and things like that. Those have been more of the issues that I've been dealing with. But other than that, COVID wasn't a major thing for me personally. But what about you guys?
What about the well, I mean, me personally, I think that my wife had it. My wife and I had it, and then it was gone. Like, we didn't we didn't get the jab or anything. We just let her up, because like you said, like, I'm not in the higher risk group. My wife wasn't in a high risk group, so it was just like a flu, and then it was gone. But what about let's set aside the actual, like, virus or whatever, but what about like the other sort of reactions to it? Let's say the government reactions to it, things like that. Like, did that make your life different or challenging in any way?
So it did, in a sense. My work involves assisting students who are accused of misconduct on campus. That tends to be men and boys.
Yeah.
And, between 2011 and 2020, there was this huge ramp of campus kangaroo courts, like these sham proceedings in which students would be accused and then expelled, often without due process, without fair notice, without having their witnesses interviewed, sometimes without even knowing the charges against them, or seeing the evidence presented against them, or being able to respond to it, that kind of stuff. A lot of that happened between 2011 and 2020. One of the consequences of COVID was that a lot of classes moved off campus. There were fewer students mingling together. And because of that, there were, I think COVID impacted this. There hasn't been a kind of study for this, but I do think COVID impacted the amount of opportunities students had to mingle with each other, and by extension, any kind of misconduct or allegations of misconduct that could arise from those interactions. So, I say that is one of the reasons why there has been kind of a decline in these cases, which it's now coming back up just recently with the Biden administration. We're
gonna come back to the timing of these things, because I do think that's interesting. But go ahead. You said that they're
that's really how it impacted me more than anything, because one of the things is that I run a database service, and these are databases for students who are accused of misconduct, or attorneys that are helping them, or the advocacy groups that are assisting them. And these databases have things like lawsuits and government investigation files and long lists of thousands of attorneys that have worked on these cases and all of these statistics, and we run it as a service, and that's how we stay afloat. That's how we. It's a subscription service, but we try to keep it affordable because we are very sympathetic to the issues, and so that has been something that has really helped our organization stay afloat. Now, with the decline of misconduct cases, has come a decline of investigations and lawsuits that result from that, and so we have taken a hit. We did take a hit because of that, but I think we have been so conservative, if you will, in preparing for the future, or rather, not conservative in using our finances.
Fiscal, you mean? Yeah,
fiscally
like
conservative. Thank you.
Yeah, fiscal. Yeah,
and that did not put us asunder, although it certainly did for many other organizations and businesses.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something you said, that around there was like this ramping up of cases, right? And allegations or whatever, allegations of misconduct.
Yeah.
And then it sort of declined because of COVID and everything. I guess the opportunities were
COVID
just
was
not
one
there.
of the factors. Really, the biggest
one of them. Yeah.
Really, the biggest factor was the Trump administration came in, rewrote the rules, and said that they said the jig is up. Campus administrators were no longer going to be enabling these show trials. That was the biggest thing. But I do believe COVID was a significant factor as well.
Yeah, so that's okay. That's good that you pointed out, because I remember in 2016, Betsy DeVos, was that her name, was put in charge of the education, and she removed the Dear Colleague letter. Is that like a big part of what changed this, you think?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But really, I think the biggest part of it was just her coming in, removing or revoking, rescinding that Dear Colleague letter, and promising a new rulemaking session, whereby the administration would flesh out the rights of the accusers and the accused, or the complainants and respondents. And that was essentially a signal to campus administrators that the jig is up. Now, also campus administrators knew that that's the Trump administration would not be as bloodthirsty, is probably a good term, in just cracking down on these cases, regardless of the guilt or innocence of the accused and things like that. The Biden administration and the Obama administration, or excuse me, the Obama administration did a lot to foster fear and panic among schools. They put their names on government websites saying that they were being investigated. Of course, that in turn got feminist groups and other survivor groups to put them on blast. And the schools really value their reputation. The government, the Obama administration, threatened schools with the nuclear option of pulling all of their federal funding if they failed to comply with guidance documents, which was technically an illegitimate act by the administration. These sub-regulatory guidance documents did not have the force of law, but they wielded them as though they did, and they threatened universities with failures, with consequences for failures to comply with them. And
oh, that's in. Can I just? I think your computer is doing something. Is it okay? I just heard your computer make a sound.
Yeah, that's an email coming in. So
okay.
I'll close my Outlook. Yeah,
no,
sorry.
It's okay. No problem. I just didn't want your computer to be like shutting down for some reason.
It's not booting up a video game or something like that.
So, no, what I was going to say is it's interesting you bring this up, because I did, it seems this might be similar, and I just want to get your, instincts on this, because you've been working with this for so long. So I've done a series of interviews with former military personnel who are going through their own version of this kind of, kangaroo courts and stuff, and they give me horror stories of guys that have been, accused of things, and they're dishonorably discharged. But where it comes from, and it sort of like also was happening during the Obama administration, which is why I thought it was interesting, because they brought this up. It's that there was, in the military, there were people of, significant rank that were being informed by experts or academics in the subject of this kind of, these rape culture theories. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, and
they
probably
were,
trauma informed in methods of investigating.
right. And they were basically,
evidence.
but what was the real thing that stood out was they said, well, here is a statistic that, 1 in 4, 1 in 3 women, whatever. And or that this number of allegations, it's this very small number of allegations that are actually considered false. Like they throw these statistics and they say, your conviction rate is not matching the data, so you should be having more convictions.
Yeah, it's like these quotas of like, get me my scalps, kind of mentality, and it's
and it was happening in the military too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I talked with a guy named Arvis Owens. He used to be.
That's the guy, Arvis Owens. I had him on my show.
Awesome.
Yeah. When did you talk to him?
Yeah, I got a text message from him just I think today about since we had the election yesterday here in the United States, oh, by the way, I thank you for the privilege of giving me this prime real estate time the day after the election. Of all the scrubs on the internet, you could have invited them to the show.
Well, you are welcome. You are among us scrubs of the internet. We're all part of that. But I mean, it was good timing because I know that if anything, what's happening with and I don't want to talk a lot about the election too much, but we can talk about it in the after show. But what happened before with Betsy DeVos and the the removal or the revoking of the Dear Colleague letter and all of the other changes, and then the sort of leading up to this election, there was a lot of discussion about what has to change in education, what has to change in the military, and I think that there is a lot of excitement around this, so it does make sense. But it's very cool that you spoke to Arvis as well. Shout out to Arvis Owens if you're watching.
Oh yeah,
I know
I'll probably let him know. He's a go-getter, man.
He lives near me too. He's in Virginia. Yeah. I haven't met with him yet, but I'm hoping to at some point. So
yeah, I can tell he's former military just by talking to him. He's got that confidence and determination and all that stuff, and just very, very direct. Kind of person.
He's a pro for sure.
Yeah.
But okay, anyway, we're digressing a bit. So the other thing I wanted to ask, because I think this is also the case with the military and also things that I've seen in the business world. I've spoken to people that work in various fields who have also been pushed out, and it all kind of started happening around the same time. So you mentioned that allegations were really ramping up. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to get and this was around what time was this happening?
Between allegations against students that was they really ramped up around between 2011 and 20 to the end of the Obama administration was really the Wild West, if you want to call it that. 2016. That was when the era of kangaroo courts began on campus. And schools had almost no pushback, really, until now in 2013. 2013 is when I think the litigation movement really began for accused students, because at that time, for the first time in U.S. history, lawsuits by accused students broke into the double digits. Students were alleging that their rights were violated in these proceedings. In 2014, the number of lawsuits by those students against their schools doubled. And then the year after that, the number of lawsuits doubled again from that 1 year prior. And then in 2017, 2018, by 2018, we had 126 lawsuits against higher education institutions just by students, not including teachers. And a lot of them were successful. One of the leading compliance organizations, higher ed compliance organizations called ATICSA, the Association of Title IX Administrators. They issued this white paper to their clients who are Title IX administrators. And they were saying, look, guys, the field is being just hammered with litigation. And for the first time ever in history, higher ed is losing more cases than they're winning. And, you are going too far. You're going to spark, this counter swing, if you will. And it's going to end up hurting the cause of, policing the sex crimes, which rightfully belong in court, I think.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. And And so, but by that point, it was too late because the lawsuits had already ramped up. Betsy DeVos had already been brought in, and they were already deliberating on rulemaking procedures and things like that. That was in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
That
yeah, a lot of this stuff
really
was
started
happening
to
around
turn.
that time. Yeah, I know that a lot of that stuff was happening in all different areas of public and private life, like in the private sector as well as the public sector. So very, very weird. So okay, so let's get to the new thing that you're doing now. I assume that you still do the work Title IX for all, but you're just adding this is like an extension of that or something separate, right?
Well, sort of. It's like joined at the hip is how I would phrase it. So it's funded by Title IX for all. So that's where it is. And the idea is that we need to reach young men where they are at. And where they are at is on YouTube. Young men don't really go to the blogosphere, the whole thing like 10 years ago or 14 years ago, we were in a very different place, right? Like you had like A Voice for Men was this huge, dominant flagship blog, right? And it had a ton of activity. And this is not to knock A Voice for Men, by the way, that trends have changed. It's just that the world has moved away from the blogosphere. And a lot of blogs around 2014, 2015, they just saw massive decline as the adoption of social media just radically increased. By 2012, most people had smartphones. They were, you had Twitter, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, more and more people were getting on social media. The great blogging age of the early internet was increasingly in decline, and of course, youth today have shorter attention spans than the our generation.
For sure.
So they naturally kind of lean into social media, and so where was I going with this?
We were talking about like no, it's okay. You're talking about okay. Let's back up. So what we're talking about is your new channel / series called The Common Man. And that you're going to try and meet men where they're at. Yeah. And yes, it's true. This is like, you can look at the rise of a lot of like people on the internet that men particularly watch or consume. Like they're Joe Rogan is very popular with men. Tucker Carlson is very popular with men. History podcasts, got Manosphere guys, the whatever podcast, etc.
And even the term Manosphere has changed, I think, significantly.
Oh, for sure, significantly. Absolutely.
Like the old Manosphere was more like just two groups or three, MGTOW, men's rights, and then you had some PUA guys on the side over there. But now it seems like the dating conversation is now front and center, whereas before it had been kind of on the sidelines. And it's no longer so much a conversation about rights and things like that, which there's some good and bad there, but I'm sure we could get into that further.
No, I agree. I know what you mean. Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, though, because if the audience has changed as well, so like some of the guys that were on there, they've gotten older, probably have sort of like, I think the Manosphere served them its purpose in the old Manosphere, especially the men's rights part of it, because the way I measure this is when I got involved with this, my primary goal was just to like get the conversation out into the world so that people are talking about the things we talk about in their living rooms, in their schools, etc. And I think that that's happening. You can see, like, for example, the word misandry used to be one that nobody heard of, and now you see it everywhere. Yeah, and it's like, okay,
sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean it.
I was just saying that was always my goal, and I think that we're doing that. But a lot of the people who are on or sort of like in these manosphere spaces now, they're younger guys, so they obviously have girls on the brain, and they're like, oh, I want to learn how to pick girls up, date them, and attract them, etc. But the part about like child custody and father's rights and all that, that's not quite, they're not at that point yet, but they should be. I think they should be made aware of it. So but I see how. Maybe what I'm getting at is that if the manosphere's changed, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the audience has changed. Like it's a different group of people, and they're younger, and they're, you know, they have different things on their mind. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there is value in addressing social strategies for young men. I think one of the and just teaching them a certain level of self-respect and teaching them to walk away from abusive relationships. I think one of men's great underutilized powers is simply walking away. A lot of the traditional men's role has been sort of a compulsion to do certain things in behalf of women, and when in reality, you know, I think if you were going to say that some women do deserve that, it's probably the ones you're most connected to, the ones you're most invested in, your family, your you know, your wife and your daughter, things like that. You know, things like, you know, protecting them and, you know, that kind of thing. But
yeah,
the idea that men are obligated to just, you know, like say provide for or protect all women everywhere,
yeah,
just for, you know, because they have a vagina, just
yeah. For example, the you know, do you know about the Daniel Penny case?
Yeah.
Do you know about Daniel Penny on the?
Oh, yeah.
He stepped in right on the New York subway, and now, you know, he's looking at like manslaughter, and I you know, it was because he thought he was, like you said, serving, you know, doing the right thing, which would normally in a healthy society we would see that for what it is, but
he was protecting the community, really.
Yeah.
And it's like whenever the authorities don't do their job, you need occasionally you need good men to stand up, or good people to stand up, and usually it's going to be a guy, I got to say, when there's the prospect of violence involved. And that's one of the, you know, like violence is characterized as this negative among men, but in very specific situations, you know, that it can also be a good thing, you know, when you are defending other people, that kind of thing. That's so yeah, anyway.
Yeah. So, okay. So what do you want to do with the common man? What do you, because I want to get like a sense of what the goals of that channel is, and what your work's going to be.
One of the things that I want to introduce a little bit of a different conversation to the online men's issues discussion, because I got to say, some of the men's issues discussion online, I'm not talking about Honey Badger Radio, I'm talking about I'm talking about some other, you know, there are, for example, men's issues channels out there that do nothing but just bash on single moms all day. And I see those channels and I'm like, you know what? I just don't think this is productive. I got to be perfectly honest. Now, there are some women who have, by their own poor choices, gotten themselves into this situation, of course. And of course, I think there's some value in drawing attention to those poor choices and how other people might avoid those choices. But there are some channels out there that, for example, just bash on single moms all day, no matter their origin story, if you will. And that's just one example of many of how I feel like in some cases the conversation has been kind of lopsided. And I want to have more of a balanced conversation where it's not explicitly right wing, it's not explicitly left wing, and it's not just bashing on women like some do, because some really do that. And I feel like that could hurt the cause if there are not people who. Now that doesn't mean don't critique the darker aspects of you know, female behavior, but it does mean just to balance it out with, you know, not, you know, that kind of thing. So that's one thing. And I think that we need more men's advocates on YouTube, I think, who are discussing things in a more philosophical way, trying to relate that to people's lives, promote solutions, that kind of thing. And that's really one of my goals. Another one is that I want to inform people about the things that I am most educated on and most practiced in, which is the actual world of, you know, accused students and the process of a Title IX investigation and how they can help themselves. That kind of thing, you know, if they're wrongly accused. So, because their future is at stake. So, so those are some of the goals with the channel.
And when you say it's like a conversation, is it just going to be you, or are you going to be like talking with people, or going? I might bring on,
or I could invite people. That we'll have to see how it goes. there are all sorts of ways I could take it. I could set up a Patreon like thing. At some point, I could bring on people. I might bring my wife in because my wife has been very helpful to me in some of the back end work with our databases. She's helped me with some of the marketing and branding and stuff like that. She really helps be kind of a counterbalance to me, or an assistant gut check, if you will, on some of the stuff. And back there, I don't know if you can see her. That's my cat. That's our chief morale officer back there. I'm here in our spare bedroom / office. So our organization is really me and my wife. My wife is really a silent help to me. She doesn't like to be so much in the spotlight, and she's not as practiced on very technical matters regarding the law or things like that. But in terms of social matters, she has a very good sense, and she has a lot of integrity and character and intelligence, and she's also very conversational. So I'd like to have her on as well at some point. So the idea is, it could go any which way. I think I have to have some kind of basic plan, but have room to adapt. And just kind of sense what gets the most traction and follow that as reasonably far as I can.
I was gonna say, so basically what you're saying is there's a couple ways you can approach creating content with regards to how this conversation around what I think is the most important conversation we should be having, which is trying to bridge this sort of gap between men and women. And part of it, because like when we talk about men's issues that are legal issues or legislative issues or political issues, it's hard to get people to want to listen because we already men operate as sort of like a deficit in terms of like compassion for them. And that has to do with a lot of things, the way we're socialized and the way that we, sort of like give examples of men, like what they mean to us or don't mean to us. And there's a lot of negative propaganda against men out there. So we got to work on like basically making it to where men are more loved by women, but also that they love themselves, and that the value in them it becomes sort of a given, whereas right now it's sort of taken for granted. There's a lot of people who say, well, we don't need men for anything, while they're on the internet, using electricity, drinking water and all of that.
I really do think you touch on a very important point, because men and women are different, right? Like they contribute to the world in distinctive ways, and I feel like we need to highlight that. And there's a lot of chest thumping out there about, oh, if men were all vanished, and we would live in a paradise, and vice versa, so it's just kind of nonsensical. But I feel like there's so much tribalism nowadays. Like you have to go with and the dominant narrative on gender is that you have to be tribal in favor of women. Otherwise, otherwise
you're betraying them or something. Right?
And even the mere attempt at balance is seen is misconstrued as some kind of bias against women, which so anyway,
for sure. So I go, okay, so I'm saying that this is what I think the most important thing is, and I think that there has been some progress in the conversation. Like I said, men are acknowledging their pain. They see that it's real. It has a name, and that's good. But I also think there is something to be said for the importance of talking about things that you are for rather than things that you are against.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You see, like defining your goals based on like what you want. So, or what can we do? Because we can certainly, let's say, highlight bad actors and use them as examples. Say, okay, this is what you should avoid. Here are the reasons, right?
Yeah.
And all of that. And I think that there's a lot of use in that. Also, you know, poking the holes in our current paradigm, which is the feminist paradigm, to say, well, here's why the world we all operate under, you know, this is what's wrong with it. And the reason for this is not simply to, you know, just like take a dump on feminism, but it's also it's mainly to tell people the way that you are living and thinking and viewing things is not the way it has to be. Here are other options. And I think that is, firstly, I think it's very freeing for people. And secondly, then they will have the space to say, what can I do that is positive for myself or for, you know, the people in my community or whatever. I think that one of the things that I've been advocating for a very long time is that men need their own spaces so that they can like work together on things, projects, you know, whatever, learn to be in a cooperative space. You know, this is like, I think that it's the way that men heal that's different from the way women heal. Like women like to, you know, they go to therapy, they talk about their problems, they work it out in that way or with their girlfriends. But men, they maybe they go, you know, do something together. Like
they literally work out.
They literally work out in the gym, whatever.
Or they go to martial arts classes and just you know, beat each other up with you know, boxing gloves and stuff like that. You know,
exactly. But they have their space where they go, and I think, you know, because I think that then men can put a focus on the good that they can do, or the things that they can like celebrate or encourage in each other. And I think that is a better long-term, you know, solution for them. So because otherwise they will fall into nihilism. Yeah.
And I think fundamental to that strategy would be just recognizing, that men and women are different. They're going to respond to different stimuli, right? And what works for women doesn't necessarily work for men. And we can't just view men as defective women when they don't respond in the same way that women respond to certain stimuli, that kind of thing, you know? So, totally on board with what you're saying.
So, well, how often do you want to make content? Like, I don't know, are you still working out like the format and all these other things?
So I'd love to make 2 videos a month. We'll see where it goes. I understand that if I don't post at least 1 video a month, then I'm not going to have enough content to really keep people regularly engaged, that kind of thing. I do. I have done a lot of blogging on my website. One of my ideas is just to take a lot of the content that I already have there and just to relate it in a more conversational way through a video. And I think that that'll really help people understand the issues. So so the idea is kind of to do maybe either 50-50 a Title IX issue versus a general men's issue, or maybe 1/3, 2/3, where it's like 1/3 a Title IX issue and 2/3 general men's issues, that kind of thing. Because the idea is I do want to get people interested in the Title IX aspect, but if you start talking to people about Title IX, they don't understand what it is. A lot of people nowadays think it's about transgender stuff, and it is to a certain extent. But there's so much more to it.
It was a thing that we should have been talking about way before the trans thing became an issue, because the trans thing is a very recent phenomenon, right? But now everyone's like, oh, we got to do something about Title IX. All of a sudden, everybody knows because the women are being affected. But I think that's a good idea. What are some general men's issues that you want to talk about when you do this?
Yeah, so I think we already touched on one of them, is that one of my video ideas is like make one video about what would happen if all men disappeared for a day. You know, what would happen? And then just go down the list of all of the industries that men dominate, you know, like I'll maintain the infrastructure. And I think it would be kind of an entertaining video about how, you know, like within this amount of hours, this would fail, and then that would fail, and then that would fail. And you would get maybe 2 hours of peace before all the roadways were shut down, and, you know, water treatment plants stopped treating water, and your electricity went out, and that kind of thing. You know, like on day 1, this is what it would look like on day 2. And then I can make another video about what if all the women disappeared from the world and that kind of thing, and just kind of make it balanced that way. And in that way, I would kind of maybe troll some of the people as well who maybe got a little bit too much on their high horses with like favoring one sex or the other, and maybe help establish some balance there.
Yeah.
I think there is a certain level of kind of, you want to, some of the entertaining value, you want to have some entertaining value, I think.
Absolutely.
And some of it may involve trolling your own your own viewers. So there is that. But yeah, and I do think, and I have to be careful with YouTube here about their content guidelines or requirements, but I do think we need to address the dark side and the light side, if you will, of both men and women, because the way I was brought up and the way a lot of men have been brought up is they were taught to, if like when I went over to my first girlfriend's house and I met her dad for the first time, he was like a traditional Southern dad. Like he walked me over to his gun cabinet and he he was very clear that if anything happened to his little girl, he would know how to use them. Right. And, we teach young women about how to stay safe and things like that, but we don't teach young men how to stay safe. We don't teach them to identify red flag behaviors.
Yeah, we assume that young men are basically grown adults. Like that's why we sort of normalize this idea of the date's dad showing them the guns, because there's like it's like giving them hyper agency, right? To like teenage men or young men who are, maybe it's their first date ever, maybe sure, their hormones are running wild and they got sex on their mind, but that doesn't necessarily make it okay to terrify them like that. So I think that there should be more balance, and for sure, like you said, men can be victimized by their female dates as well. This happens. We didn't even want to call it rape for like the longest time until pretty recently. So yeah, I think that that's a good one.
Yeah, and it's not about saying like men are all good, women are all bad. It's really just saying, look, there's complexity here. There's men do have elements of their behavior that are distinctively good and distinctively bad, and same thing with women. But the conversation that dominates the discussion on gender equality is just all, toxic masculinity and the woman is a victim and blah blah blah. And I find that people have really a political or an ideological incentive to just deny any kind of harmful behavior that is distinctively performed by women, because it's immediately, if you go far left on the ideological spectrum, they tend to write it off as some kind of, that's a stereotype, and therefore, because it's a stereotype and because it's unflattering, that must make it untrue, and that must make it or it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, because you're not flattering, you're being unflattering to the wrong group, things like that. Whereas they have absolutely no problem being unflattering to men. But the reality is that stereotypes are often true, and it's not a matter of just denying those stereotypes. Some stereotypes are definitely false because they're the product of propaganda or biases and things like that. But it's not, you can't do a wholesale denial of one or the other. We do have to navigate that responsibly. And, there has to be someone out there who's willing to do that. And there's just very few who are. I hate to say it.
No, it's true. Although there's something else too, because another consequence of, or a weird side effect of this thing that we're talking about is that, these men who have these what do you call it? The dark triad traits. Yeah. They're like the bad boy men, but they have the dark triad traits. These are the ones that are the most attractive to women. And they're the ones that usually put women in a situation where they end up being a single mother. So and then of course, I think what is a real challenge there, just as an aside, is that what has to happen if we want that to sort of correct itself in some way, which I think we want. Like, if I don't think that single moms want to be single moms.
Yeah.
any more than, you know, men want to be like end up raising children that aren't theirs or something like that. So what we need is a bit more honesty and transparency
Yeah.
about like what, you know, our, it's not just that are men behaving badly, because there are men who behave badly. But the problem is that if women reward that behavior, then there's going to be more of that behavior. So there has to be a conversation about like what behaviors do we incentivize and which ones do we disincentivize, and can we do that without really worrying about, you know, what the plumbing is of the person that's engaging in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So so in the last, what would you say, this is a question I like to ask people that haven't been on in a while. In what ways do you think you have changed in like the last, since 2019? Have you?
Since 2019?
Yeah, since like we last had talked to you, like this is at the ICMI. I know
Oh, dear.
COVID changed people in some ways, but like, are there anything, like any ways that you're, you know, maybe your views have changed, maybe your, you've learned some things that you didn't know before, or
Yeah,
whatever?
I have changed in a few ways. I do think that there is a very real danger, that there are like the Andrew Tates of the world are going to cause damage, not only to innocent people, but also to the cause of just paying attention and empathizing with men and boys. I do think there is a certain amount of that, and so I think the more balanced and positive voices we have out there, that are, you know, just speaking with authenticity, you know, they're not afraid to tell it what it is. So they've got that. That is one positive of Andrew Tate, right? Like you get the feeling that he's very blunt, he's very direct, and all that kind of stuff. And perhaps he's just a big showman or whatever, but he presents that feeling well, I think, in his published content. And I think people gravitate towards that, and they need that kind of no nonsense, you know, they need that feeling of authenticity. And I think that needs to come from more people who are speaking a better message and things like that. So that in that sense, I have changed. I do have to say,
You know, but
about,
you didn't feel, well, how, like, what did you feel about that before? Were you kind of indifferent?
well, I feel like before it was a lot more overblown, because between like 2010, 2011 or whatever, a lot of the criticisms of people who talked in behalf of men were disingenuous.
Oh
They
yeah,
were
sure.
just absolute belligerent propaganda by people who knew they could get away with it, right? And you know, there were some things that honestly I would have done well. Hindsight 2020, I would have done better if I were other people. I'm not trying to knock too many other people in the movement that much, but there were, but I do feel like the ratio of how fairly or unfairly rather people were portrayed was very different 10 years ago than compared to, like, say, some of the extreme people today. I feel like finally they found, you know, finally mainstream media or whatever has finally found a legitimate bad actor, you know, that they can latch on to, and things like that. So whereas back then a lot of the criticisms were disingenuous.
I see. I
Um,
see.
and another way that I've changed is that I have started to look at these issues in a little bit more of a balanced way. I do want to say there is so much complexity to what we do in the world of Title IX, for example. And if you are a traditional, I'll just say the me of 2013 or even 2015 would not have been equal to the task that is before me today. And I do feel like I have changed in that regard, because one of the things that you'll learn whenever you're advising accused students is that you cannot always attribute every unfavorable or frustrating outcome to bias on behalf of administrators or the institution, et cetera. Sometimes people are just poorly trained. Sometimes people just get busy. It is true that, and if you just come in pounding on the table and accusing people of being biased and things like that, you're going to have a hard time trying to get them to help you in areas where they do have a lot of discretion, and they do have a lot of discretion in these areas. So you really have to work on your salesmanship with these people. It's not just a matter of, a lot of, I think a lot of people who identify as activists, they see activism as shouting their opinions at people online, but you just can't do that here. And it's really, a lot of it is about knowing when to be silent, and really erring on the side of saying less, if anything. And that, back 10 years ago, when I was mainly running a blog that mainly existed as a defiant critique of our institutions, and I still do that to a certain degree, I would say I was less disciplined then than I am today. So in that sense, I have changed. And I do think that seeing more of the side of, in my research, I've also seen more of the side of women's issues as well. And there are some legitimate, women's issues. It's not as much an issue of legal rights as it is enforcement of those rights that are already guaranteed. And I do think that helps me in my own advocacy and assisting accused students as well.
Oh, I think that that is a healthy way to operate, because I can understand. I have a focus on, obviously talking about men's issues, but I do understand for a few reasons. One of them being the fact that men and women are different. So when they experience something, the way that women internalize it is different, even if they're the same, in every other metric. So you have to talk to them in that way so that they, you know what I mean? I don't know if it makes sense. Like, for example, there was a very famous feminist academic named Naomi Wolf, and she wrote many books, and she debated Karen in the past. And then when the COVID thing happened, she kind of changed her entire focus. Now, this was also shortly after she was disgraced for some really awful statistic that she had in a book that basically discredited her a lot. Yeah. But she ended up changing gears and talking a lot about stuff dealing with, the vaccines and COVID, et cetera, and the government response and the internet censorship, et cetera. And then as a result of that, because I was kind of I wasn't watching closely, but I was noticing her sort of popping up, in my, in my mentions, in my space. Occasionally I'll see something about her. And she got interviewed by Jordan B. Peterson, and he did a talk with someone else later and said that, Naomi Wolf had this she became a feminist partly because she had this really bad experience with a man. And I know this seems like kind of a cliche thing, have bad experience, become an activist as a result. And I know it doesn't excuse any of the really wrong or untrue things she may have said or the way it affects her bias. But I think that because she is a woman, on some level, I have to be okay, I get it, and it doesn't really affect my views on anything that I can see as objective, but it does, I think, make me a little bit more careful about how I talk to these people, because you don't want to, I don't know, you don't want to be as cruel as maybe they have been to you, because I think that's another thing that you run the risk of, right? So
that's the classic tale of advocacy, right? You peer into the void and the void peers back at you, right? And you try not to become the thing that you hate. And there is the real risk of that, right? With any kind of philosophical or social movement, So I think that, and I think this election
and that is how it gets tribal. That is how it gets tribal, right? Because as soon as you stop, even I know that, there are people who are on the feminist side or whatever that would at least say they don't care if I drop dead tomorrow or whatever. I've got my haters, but it's fine. I don't wish anything on them, and I just kind of carry on. And I usually don't. I'm not vocal about like what I really like believe about things if it's not necessary, but I sort of let things play out. You know, so like
Yeah.
you were going to mention this election. So what were you going to say about that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think this election was as much a referendum on issues like the economy and certain campaign strategies as it was on tribalistic social policies like, you know, wokeness or whatever you want to call it. This kind of view that, you know, like that you have to yeah, this kind of sex and race tribalism that has really taken over a lot of identity politics. And what I see far too much in a lot of the identity politics that have dominated the last 30 years is there has been, you know, there's been a huge problem in not in a focus on not ending discrimination or hatred, but rather on redistributing those evils onto other groups. And one of the things I really like to say is that everyone in their own mind, everyone who discriminates in their own mind believes that they do so for a good cause. And that's true no matter what movement you look at that discriminates. And, you know, in the last 30 years, there have been a lot of policy proposals and things put into law that do discriminate on the basis of sex and race. And at this, I think that should not be the bar, right? Like what we need the bar to be is we're not discriminating against anyone on the basis of sex and race, because as soon as you lower the bar and say, okay, it's okay to discriminate, but we're not going to call it discrimination because it's for a good cause that makes us feel good. Well, now you've just lowered the bar to we have to haggle on what discrimination is acceptable. And once you have lowered to that point, now you run the risk of other people advocating discrimination that you may not necessarily agree with, but they in their own minds believe it is for a good cause. And so long as enough people agree that it's for a good cause, well, if you've already agreed to that model, how can you really complain? Or how much can you really complain? And so I think that we really need to raise the bar, and the bar has definitely been lowered up and, you know, over the past 30 years. And I think this election is an indicator that we are moving away from that lowered bar and raising it back up. So.
Yeah. And I think that this last election, I've said this, it's kind of it's the ultimate culmination of a forced gender war where, you know, it was
forced
basically
indeed. Forced is a good word.
Yeah, it was forced. It was forced by, you know, the cathedral, the institutions, and it was basically pushing women on men and against men, and men for the most part was trying to stay out of it, or they just sort of like kept their head down. And then when election night came, they all just kind of said, okay, we're gonna, because again, I don't have the absolute proof of this, but I was hearing from Elon Musk that men were going out and voting in record numbers yesterday. So
yeah, I don't have the statistics on that. That would definitely be interested.
I would find it really interesting too. I do too, because generally men are less likely to go vote than women. Yeah. But Elon said that, and I tried to look into it, but I didn't have a lot of time. But I think it's really interesting because, you know, I spoke to a libertarian candidate for Prime Minister of Canada, I don't know, a few years ago, Tim Moen, and I was trying to help him understand that the dynamic that we're operating under is not actually a left-right dynamic. It's a male and female one. And because men and women are different and have different things that they value, and that's where, and it's not like it's always been that way, but that's where what it has become, where we've essentially put women's issues as specifically this kind of, you know, group, and men's issues is basically everything else, or it's just sort of left out on the side, and this is why it doesn't get a lot of attention. But I think that's changing, because I saw Dr. Warren Farrell did an appearance on Megyn Kelly's show very recently. It was like the video was uploaded like this morning. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I thought it was great. And you know, because that's what I'm saying. Like my whole goal the whole time was just to get people talking about it that normally don't, and that's happening more and more all the time. So you know, it's pretty exciting. A pretty exciting time in my opinion.
Yeah, and usually, unfortunately, because we have a two-party system, a lot of people do not learn from, do not take the opportunity to learn the lessons of failed elections. And I just hope that this is enough of a loss, or rather, I hope that this is that. That's probably not the right word to say. I hope that the impact of this election has really helped people think that, like, we have to start looking at things a different way.
Absolutely.
Because I do think a lot of people who identify as progressive, they ironically live in the past just as much or more than conservatives do. Like they do act as though and speak as though we are still living in the 1950s, or we're one step away from a
Handmaid's Tale,
from a
right.
theocracy or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And there are certainly disturbing elements, right, every now and then, but it's very much overblown, and oh my God, I think that we have to get to a point where we no longer where we really are inclusive. We're not just we're these groups have been favored, so now we're going to totally ignore them and favor these other groups to make up for it. We can't be like that going forward. Like we have to say, look, like, men have issues, women have issues, and it's okay for there to be advocates for both issues, and that's fine, and we need to have people who understand that, and of course each movement needs a certain amount of, needs quality control and stuff like that, and I think that's where the conversation needs to be.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're gonna end it here, and we're gonna go into the patron show and talk to the patrons. Right. So stick around, don't go, because I want to talk a little bit about what your thoughts are on education reform and these other things that have been discussed, speaking of the election. But anyway, so I want to thank you guys for joining me on the show. I want to thank you, Johnathan Taylor. It was good seeing you again. It's been a long time, so
yeah,
you look good though.
Thanks.
And
you too.
Thank you. All right, so with that said, if you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about what we discussed on the show today. You can find links to Johnathan Taylor's YouTube channel, The Common Man, in the description. More to come there, as well as his website, Title 9 for All, I think, and your Twitter.
Yeah.
Do you still use your Twitter?
Oh yeah.
Your X? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can, follow him on
X, formerly Twitter.
Formerly Twitter, yeah. And please share this video, because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat, and we'll talk to you guys in the next video.
Are machines, dude. Okay, they are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.